Well, good day viewers. Today we have a 2013 Ram 1500 crew cab, four-wheel drive, and it's here because the check engine light is on and it has a misfire. I'm going to crank this thing so we can hear the cadence of the engine while it's cranking. Clear flood mode. I don't like that. So we're going to scan it and see what codes it has to offer. So here's the results of the network code scan. We got a P0113 intake temperature sensor circuit high, and the coolant bypass valve stuck, but the cylinder number 5 misfire is what bothers me. I want to look at freeze frame data for the cylinder 5 misfire, although it feels like it's misfire. Oh, can you turn the key on, please? Actually, go ahead and start it. I think it's under system tests. No, which cylinder is misfiring? There it is. It felt like it was misfiring when I drove it in the shop. Number 5 cylinder has 18 misfire counters. Now what cylinder is number 5? Bet you it's on the driver's side. Wonder if it has misfire counters in here. No, it doesn't appear to have it in the ignition data. I'm going to look around. So here would be the air intake sensor problem. Connector wires are broken off, so we'll have to see if we can find a pigtail to fix that. But it acts like it's got a miss right now, but this doesn't have active misfire counters that I can find online, and I know it's got new plugs in it, or relatively new plugs. Alright, let's carry on. So I'm on Identifix, typed in the keyword search firing order, and this is what it pulls up. It shows a transverse remounted engine with a V6. And this is not transverse, it's longitudinal. So is this the front of the engine, and number 5 is on the right bank rear? The difference is the left bank is under the intake manifold, so to do any testing at the ignition or check the plug will require removal of the intake manifold. I think what I'm going to do is have my assistant go and unplug number 1 ignition coil and see which, unplug the coil on the right side front. So we disconnected number 1 ignition coil, and it set a fault, or you disconnected the coil on the right bank forward cylinder, and it set a fault code for insufficient ionization on the cylinder number 1 coil. So this is number 135 down the right hand side. So fortunately you can get to the coil and spark plug on that side. This side here is under the intake manifold, so that's provided, of course. It has a problem with number 5. It doesn't feel like it's missing all that bad, but it does feel like it has a slight missing. So I'm trying to do an injector kill test. It says the test will be denied if it's under 180 degrees. It's actually about 185 right now. But when I try to disable injector number 1, or any injector for that matter, the engine simply stalls. So that's not going to work very well for me. Just based on the way this thing sounds when it cranks, I think it has a compression problem. It hasn't got a dead miss. Like it's not running on this bank at all. That's weird. Unplug ignition coil number 1. Oh yeah, now it's good. Ignition coil number 3. Unplug. Very little difference with number 5. I think we're going to do a relative compression test. So here's the results of the relative compression test, and it shows no significant low cylinders. They're all pretty close to the same. So I decided to take the plug out of number 5 and look at it, and it looks fine. So we're going to swap the coil from number 1 to number 5 and number 5 to number 1 and see if the misfire moves to number 1. So I'm going to clear the codes again, reactivate the misfire counters. Back, clear codes, yes. We've got the coil swap from number 1 to number 5, number 5 to number 1, and I'm going to have my assistant start it up again. And if we're lucky, the misfire has now moved to number 1. Doesn't appear to be. Counting misfires on number 5. It's not a dead miss because if I disconnect number 5 ignition coil, it does change a little bit, but it's like you can see number 5 is counted 17, 20 misfires. And then this in progress is going to switch to global disable, and this is going to go back to 0 in a second. And it'll likely set a fault code P0305. So let's do an injector flow test. Let's see if we can do that. So I'd like to do an injector balance test or injector flow test, compare number 5 to number 1 and 3. I can get at those injectors, but there's no fuel pressure test port on here, so I'll have to take the high pressure fuel line off here and put a T fitting in, unless there's a fitting on this side, but I don't see one. There's a fuel pressure sensor here. I do want to put a pressure gauge on it so I can watch the pressure drop when we fire the injectors. Well, I'm going to see if I can get this fitting off. Put a T in there. So I finally got a fuel pressure gauge teed into the line, and I got my Kent Moore injector tester here, and I've got a couple of adapters set up. I've got it on injector number 1. I'm going to cycle the key so that it builds up fuel pressure, because this doesn't have an external fuel pump relay. So we take note of the starting fuel pressure. It's about 62 pounds. And I'm going to press the test button on the tester. And it dropped down to about 31 pounds. Now we're going to repeat the test on injector number 3. And again, we have to cycle the key. Get the fuel pressure back up again. So now we're going to test injector number 3. We got to hold this connector in. And shit, that didn't make a connection. Okay, here we go. That went from about 61 to 30 and a half. And then we're going to try it on injector number 5. Hopefully it's going to flow less. I'm going to cycle the key. Why couldn't this be a Ford where we can do this test with the scan tool? So we're starting out at about 61.5 psi. Fire the injector. Well, that's the same kind of drop, although it sounds different. So that's inconclusive. Ah, boy. Well, let me think about this for a few minutes. We've got a vacuum gauge on a central vacuum port, and we're sitting at about 18 inches of vacuum, 19, 18 and a half, and it's really fairly steady, but you can see it's shaking. Now that plug did look good, but let's move that plug. Why I didn't do that before, I don't know. So the plug on the left is from number 5, and this is from number 1. And as I said, I changed these plugs last summer. And the plug looks fine, there's no carbon tracking on it, not cracked. So we're going to switch number 1 to number 5. I've already switched the coils. We'll see if the misfire follows the plug. So we're going to clear the codes. Should have a P0305. Engine coolant bypass valve stuck. Multiple cylinder misfire. That's after running the injectors, filling the cylinders up with, or intake ports up with gas. Clear codes. Yes. Let's make sure they're gone. I know that intake code is still there, but that shouldn't affect the misfires. And system tests. Which cylinder is misfiring? Once it's set to misfire code, these misfire counters don't work, it appears. So it should say waiting or in progress right here. Let's watch cylinder number 5 misfire when I start it up. Still misfiring on cylinder number 5. 17, 21, 23, 25. Now I swapped the coils, I swapped the plugs. Injector flow test seems normal. What else could it be? An intake leak on that intake port? It's mass airflow, or sorry, it's a map sensor vehicle, speed density vehicle, so usually a vacuum leak makes it run fast. It's definitely misfiring on number 5 according to this, and it feels like when I disable cylinder number 5. But for whatever reason, let's see if it's set a code yet. Bypass valve stuck. You would think if there was a valve action problem, see how it says global disabled, and it's not counting the misfires anymore. And I bet you there's a P0305 code in the computer now. Yeah, P0305. And I can't clear it while it's running. Well, I'm going to see if I can find any vacuum leaks around the intake port. I did have the intake off last summer, but I put new intake gaskets in it at that time. So doing a keyword search on Identifix for P0305, I find a number of cases where ignition coils are causing the issue, but also rocker arms. Now you would think if we'd had a valve problem, we'd have unstable vacuum at an idle, but it says 18 to 19 inches of vacuum, and I got 19, and it's pretty steady. Misfire number 6 cylinder. So looking at these cases here, it appears the rocker arms are common to fail on these things. It looks like it's got a valve cover leak on that side too, because that was another complaint that he had, was an oil leak. Vehicle had a miss at idle, commonly small misfire. Test leads to base engine, remove valve cover, looked at but followed cries of bullet to replace rockers and lifters on affected cylinder. After removing, found one intake rocker needle bearing had failed. Had up and down play enough to cause a miss. Could not see the rocker arm worn or any signs of a problem to cause the misfire until I removed the exhaust cam and found slight play in the rocker wheel. Oh boy. This one says rocker arm's vacuum gauge was not steady, and our gauge is steady. And it's not 5 minutes to pull that rocker cover off. But look at the bright side, at least it's on the right side, not the left side under the intake manifold. I'm going to do a little bit more research. Well, here's where we're at. I'm 99% sure it's not ignition related. I've swapped the coils twice. I swapped the spark plugs. I've done an injector flow test, and number 5 injector flows the same as number 1 and number 3. It does not show a fluctuating needle on the vacuum gauge, although I've been fooled by that before. Normally if you have a valve problem, it'll show a pulsing vacuum, but it doesn't necessarily always do that. These are 4 valve cylinders, so there's 2 intake valves, 2 exhaust valves. So if one of the intake valves is not opening properly, it'll affect it at idle more than anything. And I suspect it's either going to have a flat cam lobe or a roller follower needle bearing failure. But to do that, it requires removal of the camshafts. I mean, we could pull the valve cover off this right side, but once we go in, we're committed at that point. It does have a leaky valve cover on the right side as well. I'm going to put it up in the air and inspect for other oil leaks. Maybe the left side's leaking as well. This thing's got roughly 220,000 kilometers on it. If it's the original engine, I'm not sure on that. So we've got to have a serious heart-to-heart. To do the camshafts on this thing requires some locking tools, holding tools, and to remove the phasers off the front without taking the timing chain all apart. And do you really want to do all of that work with 220K on here and reuse the original timing chain, tensioners, and phasers? So I'm not sure where we're going to go. I need to talk to the customer, and we'll see what happens. So we're having a look at the oil leak underneath this thing, and it looks like it's coming from the back of the engine. There is some oil seepage from that left valve cover. You can see that drop up there, but I don't think that's all of it. I'm sorry, the right valve cover. This has had the oil cooler filter housing replaced a couple of times, and that could be leaking again, or still, because that would run down the back of the engine and down. Looks like a rear seal leak. But there is a considerable amount of oil here dripping, so this is a concern as well. I don't think all of the oil leak is from the... What kind of stupid exhaust manifold design is that? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Seriously? Those are the exhaust manifold bolts on the angle like that? Oh my god. So the exhaust manifold is integrated into the cylinder head. That looks like fun. Look at those bolts. What's left of them. And their bottom ones are slotted, so it looks like you could just slip the manifold onto the pipe on. Look at these bolts. Yeah, that'll come apart, no problem. This one's got a clamp on this side. Band clamp style. Well, you can't see that coming apart without a problem either. I mean, the rest of the truck looks pretty solid. It's been done done some work on it. Well, we're gonna have a little heart-to-heart with this guy. It's got airbags in the coil springs.